Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session, and today we'll be talking about a combination of topics. We'll be talking about systemic innovation, thrivability, and being the systems we want to see in the world. We'll explore what it takes for organizations to innovate and thrive, and how leaders can show up and step up. And my guest for today is someone who has an incredible amount of knowledge and experience when it comes to the systemic, and he's here to share from his experience, and his name is Alexander Laszlo. Now, Alexander is the president of the board of directors of the Bertalanffy Center of the Studies of Systemic Systems Science. It's a whole mouthful. He's director of development at the Laszlo Institute of the New Paradigm Research, and he's the 57th president and chair of the board of trustees of the International Society for the Systems Sciences. He's also the president of the Honorary Board of Advisors of the World Complexity Science Academy and served as a founding director of the Doctoral program in Leadership and Systemic Innovation at ITBA in Argentina. As professor of systems science and evolutionary development, his research and teaching focuses on evolutionary leadership, collaboration, and systems thinking. He's on the editorial boards of 7 internationally arbitrated research journals, recipient of the Gertrude Albert Heller Award, the Sir Geoffrey Vickers Memorial Award, and the Förderpreis Akademischer Club Award. Author of over 90 journal, book, and encyclopedia publications, and a 6th degree black belt in traditional Korean karate. And he's here today. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Alexander. Thank you so much for being here with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
My pleasure. Well, thank you so much. What a joy.
So we have a number of topics to talk about because I recall from our preparatory conversation, our free call, that there's so many different topics that you touch upon, that you write about, that you work with. And we picked a number of them to have a really rich conversation and a packed session for our viewers today. And before we dive into that, I would like to start off with, how did this systemic world unfold for you? When did it start, the systems thinking?
Well, I was born at a very early age. And all right. No, but really, it's kind of been in my family. My father, Erwin Laszlo, has done so much work working directly with Ludwig von Bertalanffy to develop a whole area that my father's considered to have be the originator of, the founder of, called systems philosophy. And wrote the System View of the World, and has written 87 books at this point. He's a very prolific man. And his work in systems thinking and general system theory, he went on to evolutionary systems theory. That's been in the family. I mean, that's it's been in an osmotic kind of environment, and I didn't really realize it was there. He never pushed me into it, He never pushed me into it, and I didn't realize it was there until I went to university. I had been studying social and cultural anthropology and human physiology. I mean, people are like, why are these are two separate things? But for me, they were both. What does it mean to be human, right? What is this thing, this human being? So I looked at it both from human physiology and from an anthropological framework. And when I went to university, I found a program in the social system sciences with Russell Acuff at the University of Pennsylvania. And they were assigning books by my father. I'm like, oh, what a coincidence. That's strange. And then I found that it's been in my backyard. It's like a garden that's been in my backyard that I'm kind of familiar with, but I never really studied. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And it's obviously been such an influence on me. I've taken my father's work into my own frames, but it's been a strong influence. And of course, studying with Russell Ackoff and Jamshid Garajidagi and Hassan Ozbekan and others at the University of Pennsylvania, I brought another kind of flow to it, particularly because my father's framing of systems thinking and Ackoff's framing of system thinking were fairly different. Ackoff is in purposeful systems thinking, and my father's in general systems thinking, general systems theory, and they kind of hold the matter of will and the influence of human volition on the future differently. So I had to kind of see how to bring those together. That's been a lot of my work.
Yeah, thank you so much for this introduction. And what intrigues me, and this is a little bit off topic, but I'm really curious. What were your findings when you looked at the question, what makes us human? Because you were doing two studies, and to you, they were two ways of looking at that same question. So how did the systemic add to that?
Well, beautifully, it provided me with this multifocal lens, because if you think about it, I guess because of these conversations with my father and the kind of this framing, I had already been looking at this phenomenon, what it means to be human, right? And by my studies of anthropology, I could study the value frames. I could study how it is in one culture. We say this is right and that's wrong. And in another culture, it's just the opposite, and they're very sure about it. It's so fascinating to me. How is it that we're so sure? How do we create our world in that sense? What are these systems that we live in? And on the other hand, the physiological aspect, how is it that we can eat a banana, and then it's gone? It's like magic. It's not anywhere. And then literally it becomes part of me. The actual atoms of the banana actually are also, we could trace them. They are in me in places, right? And parts of it get eliminated, but other parts become me, which makes me think, what eats me? I mean, what am I part of? A larger things that take me as nutrition, and I'm part of their being, these larger systems. So I had to keep these things separate, the physical and the sociocultural, until I found the systems approach. And this systems approach allowed me to think about this phenomenon, this system called the human being, in both of these perspectives. I didn't have to separate into the sciences and humanities. I could look at it as a combined, enriched, systemic, and holistic way.
Yes. Wow.
And what does it mean to be human? I don't have the answer to that. I'm still working on that. But yeah, it allows me to have that lens. Well, one thing, Jennifer, I want to say about that is that I did find that the lens, although it's tremendously powerful, it could look at anything. And so I found that I needed to find content to look at. So systems thinking in and of itself, unless I use systems thinking to think about systems thinking, which is really self-referential, I decided to look at technology and society, and I looked at the way in which technology shapes society from a systemic perspective. So that was what I used the systems thinking lens to look at. So that was my focus.
Wow. And so how does this then tie into looking at one of our topics for today, and I'm just picking one, and that is the thrivability. Because thriving, everybody has their connotations and their ideas about what that means. And I'm just tying it to what you just said about when you look at human beings, or when you look at organizations, or when you look at these living human systems and you put them in front of the system's lens, then how did you get to describe or study the phenomenon of thrivability?
Right. Can I want to talk with you about this. So what is it? I'm sorry to have to ask you, but what is thriving to you? I mean, what does that mean? And we can play with that, and I can say what it means to me. But what is thriving to you, and how is it different from other states of being?
Right. Well, to me, I think in stages when I think of thrivability, and that thrivability is on one end of a continuum of optimal aliveness or optimal performance or optimal being, as opposed to a normal being or an average being or average expression of your potential. And then on the other hand, there is as if you're almost switched off, as if there is hardly any light shining from the system that you are or the system that we are looking at. So there is almost non-functioning or not on, and then there's normal functioning, and then there is thriving. And it's a continuing dance of interaction with your environment to be in that state, because the interaction decides whether you're thriving or not. You can't thrive in non-interaction or in non-interrelatedness. There's always this conversation going on that decides whether something is thriving or not.
Right.
Thank you for that question. I never got that.
That's phenomenal. I love that.
Apparently how I look at it.
I love that. Oh, it's great. And what I'm...
But that's just me. I don't know about the people who are watching.
Yeah, but you see, that's exactly what I'm exploring, because it's a term which it's many people use in many different ways, but I'm finding that there's a lot of common holding of this. The way you expressed it was just so beautiful. And that's the way in which I like to play with it as well. And I'm finding that there's more and more convergence around what is thriving and how, for me, thriving is a step beyond sustaining, right? Sustainability and thrivability. So there's sustainability. There's so much talk in the world about personal sustainability, about business sustainability, about planetary, global sustainability. Sustainability is already, but now I think we need to have sustainability 2.0. And that's where we go to thriving. William McDonough, who wrote Cradle to Cradle and many other things, has talked about sustainability. He said, what a boring concept, sustainability. I mean, if you ask somebody, hey, how's your relationship going? Your romantic relationship, and you say, oh, it's sustainable. You say, oh, sorry, that's how are you going to make it come alive? Why do we not want to have sustainable relationships with each other, but we think sustainability or sustainable relationships is an objective with the planet and with other ecosystems and with other organizations? So he says, sustainability is living within the carrying capacity of the broader environment, of the system that we're a part of, right?
So just from my understanding, sorry to interrupt, but just from my understanding, so sustainable, you would place that somewhere in what I put in the middle? Like exactly. The normal functioning?
An important stepping stone. I mean, look, surviving is at the lower end, right? We got to just meet our survival needs, basic human needs, and the ability to survive is called, in systems terminology, as being a viable system, right? Yeah. And Stafford Beer has a lot of work on that frame. But from surviving, to sustaining, which is really important, so we can continue to coexist. We don't use up our environment in a way in which we can't, all of that. We know what sustainability is. But thrivability, as much of what you were talking about, is the full human potential. I mean, it goes into areas where we can celebrate life. Yeah. We can create abundance. We can engage with joy in what we're doing. And I think joy is a critical aspect of a thriving system. Right. And finding ways or looking at what are the systemic parameters and what are the dynamics of the system that bring forth the joy, create conditions in which I can and we can and the systems can truly express their celebration of themselves and of their life. Now, this I think is for me what thriving is about, and you can look at what are the attractors we can set. What we can look. Donella Meadows talks about the systemic leverage points of a system. What are the places we can move the system? We can find those areas where we can, let's say, augment certain functions or suggest that there's greater conversation or whatever there is that can make this more thriving. Fantastic. So we can look at those aspects, right? And at the same time, we can also look at the whole system, not just the systemic leverage points, which are the parts of the system, but also the systemic nurturance spaces. What are those spaces that we can create that give are inspirational and that give hope and that give a sense of being a part of something bigger, that a sense of community, etc. That also creates the conditions for thriving. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I'm looking at. How do we play with the systemic leverage points and the systemic nurturance spaces, and together set these attractors for thrivability?
Right. And so, what pops up for me, and I'm going to, just going to throw this in. I'm just thinking of, as soon as we talk about thrivability and sustainability, I think of some of my clients who are leaders in big multinational companies, and with whom I'm trying to search the space where we can leverage the systemic. And I'm thinking what they sometimes share with me in terms of what thrivability is in their world. And they more come up with things like high-performing organizations, and it has a lot to do with performance and high speed and optimum adaptability to the environment. And I resonate on the word joy that you just mentioned. But some leaders are like, yeah, well, do you want us to sing Kumbaya in the company? We've got stuff to do and we've got targets to reach. So do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm like,
absolutely.
So when we explore thrivability in the context of the systemic, how can we reach leaders who are in that realm, whose system is very much focused on that also?
Well, we have such a legacy and inheritance of this rational, mechanistic way of maximizing performance, efficiency, efficaciousness, and effectiveness. Really looking at those three things, and this comes from the influence that things like the work of Frederick Winslow Taylor in 1911, his book on the principles of scientific management.
Yes,
such an influence on everything. The really maximizing our efficient performance, effectiveness, and efficacy. The problem is that, as we know, actually didn't lead to higher output and higher sustainability.
No.
There was a huge amount of turnover because people were treated like cogs in the machine.
Yes.
And if you weren't maximally performing, you're out. We'll replace you with somebody who can do a better job. And there was no sense of trying to foster joy. There was no workplace quality of workplace environment. I remember working with somebody who, a boss who pulled together a team, and he said, okay, so we're going to start working on this new project. Here's the new team. He went out, got some coffee, and came back, and we were talking with each other, getting to know each other. He said, so did you get going on the project? And we're like, no, well, we're bonding. And he said, well, bond, damn it. Get on with the work. You don't need all this fluff stuff, right? But from high performance team, I actually have an article I wrote on from high performance team to evolutionary learning community. And the high performance team is fantastic. In a team, you collaborate and you can be very, very efficient and effective. But in a community, you co-create. And you can't co-create unless you're friends, because there has to be the trust to be able to fail as well. To say, I got a crazy idea and it may not work, but you want to try it out. And the community, the friends are like, hey, let's try it. And there's a lot of skepticism, and you're on your own. If you can't make a meeting because you had something happen in your family, in the team, it's like you got to make up for that. In the community, they carry you when you can't, and then you carry. There's a wonderful example of this, and I think this is where the corporate world is really learning these kind of things. There's this eco challenge which has very little to do with ecology. It's in Australia. They have this crazy race that you have to do in a team of 5 people, and it lasts for a week or so.
Okay.
And it involves bicycling, climbing mountains, kayaking, going through the desert, running. It's like ongoing, and you go for over a week. You have to pass checkpoints, and you have to pass it as a team. As a team.
And these are work teams, right?
No, these are teams. These are athletes.
Okay.
Right? Athletes from all over the world come to do. So you get Navy SEALs, right? These people who are trained. The SEALs are trained psychologically and physically to be able to endure and be an army of one, each one of them. But that's the whole thing. Each one of them. It's not particularly systemic. They found that over time, the teams that won consistently were amateur or non-professional athletes comprised of women.
Oh, interesting.
So what's up with that? So when they looked at it, they looked at what were their strategies. And you saw that the Army SEALs several times had to be rescued because they got into situations where they were not able to continue as a team because it broke down.
Yeah.
So if you're working in a team with them, their form of encouragement will be, you got to do this. We're counting on you, and you got to pull your own weight. And what are you, weak? Come on. And this is the form of often the encouragement. And each person, if you got a twisted ankle, get through it. Don't complain.
Yeah.
In the teams, and this isn't, can't generalize to all of them, but it tends to be that in many of the winning teams, the non-professional athlete women teams, if somebody had a twisted ankle, other members of their team carried them.
Yeah. So it's like moving as a system then.
The other members of the team would encourage you. Exactly. They would encourage you and say, we believe in you, we love you, you can do this. I mean, the Navy SEALs aren't going to tell each other they love each other. And there was this sense of holding, a sense of they did everything together, and they made it together across all the checkpoints. And in fact, their overall performance, even on something that was a race like this, was better than those that seemed to maximize their individual performance. And this comes down, last thing on this, sorry for taking so long, but this comes down to a whole area of study in the systems domain called socio-technical system theory. It was developed in the 1960s at the Tavistock Institute with Honorary and Trist.
Yes.
And they look at joint optimization. So you know that they look at joint optimization. They don't look at individual maximization. So they don't want to maximize technological and mechanical efficiency, nor do they want to maximize human enjoyment and joy, but they want to have a joint optimization. And in those days, the keys in the 1960s, they talked about man-machine management. Okay, so now that we look at the relationship between the human beings, the relationships with the type of technologies, the best and optimal technologies, and the relationship with the management system that's appropriate to them. So those are the 3 variables that are focused on in the joint optimization approach of socio-technical system theory, where don't maximize just for let's make it as super efficient, effective, and efficacious.
Right.
Got to bring in the human element.
Right. Right.
So thrivability is a huge part of that.
Exactly. Thank you so much also for that. I was going to say has historic look through in terms of what happened in our thinking of what is going to help us thrive, what is going to help us perform. That's where we started out in terms of what type of terminology do we actually use and how do we approach it in a corporate context, and what are the type of teams or what are the type of relationships between people that actually go into that direction of thrivability and what is required for that. So just to connect that with what we were talking about before that, and that is, so we have survival, and then we have the sustainability, and then we have thrivability. And when we want to move forward then, when we want to innovate and grow in organizations, which is another, basically a strategy for an organization to interact with its environment in an even better way and to be on purpose more. How does that tie in with thrivability? So how can you innovate systemically?
Cool. Yeah, and I think these are all fantastic, important stages. We shouldn't look at thrivability and forget the need for survival, the need to be sustainable. There's also this intermediate area of resilience. That's a big thing in corporate structures as well. Looking at building resilient teams, the ability to rebound, to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. So that's also a very practical approach, and it's kind of in between sustainability and thrivability.
Okay. So there's another one in between.
Indeed, and this comes, by the way, from the work of many people. Gene Russell. There's a whole area. Thrivable.net is an area that of people who are working on this, and it's not in any way a promotion. It's just a reference, so that I'm giving credit where credit is due. And I think that now, especially in times when we're looking at systems that are characterized by this term of VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a term that's come up actually in the 1960s. It was quite a while ago, but this is I'm sorry, no, that was the 1990s. 1990. It's still a while ago. But this concept of conditions, systemic conditions that are volatile. So in other words, they can explode very quickly or go for a very sudden change, unpredictably from one system state to another. So it's volatile.
Yeah.
Uncertain. So you don't have a clear path. You can't say, okay, based on past performance, we can predict. So it's uncertain, so it's difficult to predict. Complex, different from complicated. It's simply that it has many, many parts that you can't solve in any one disciplinary perspective. That it requires, a more enriched understanding of the system because of all the different aspects. Okay, physical, biological, chemical, technological, etc. It's a living system in our society. And ambiguous, meaning that the cues that you get about what the system is doing are not clear. These kind of conditions are more and more characteristic of the world in which we live and the kind of challenges that we face in the corporate world as well. And so to move to move with these kind of environments means if you have a frame that's fragile, where you resist disorder, you resist working with change, and there's a disadvantage to try to flow with it. You're kind of in a permanent shock because everything we got to keep things the way they are.
Yeah.
Then you can move to the next stage, which is anti-fragile, which is, okay, so look, we don't trust the change, and we're going to try to get back into things, but we're resisting change. We're not just resisting disorder, which is more of a fragile state. Then there's a holding of the VUCA challenges, which is more robust. It sustains. It doesn't care too much about it. It manages. It copes with. You just manage to you deal with the things as they come. You deflect them, and you stay on track. Then there's the agile organization, and agility. There's a lot of talk about that, and being able to move quickly is what you talked about. Being able to adapt, it embraces change. It sees what's coming and it tries to anticipate and flow with it. And then there's this concept that has come out fairly recently called anti-fragile. That's even further along this stage, and it evolves and grows from disorder. So actually, it almost says, hey, let's find those moments when everything is tossed in the air, because now we can really reorganize things and move things forward in a whole new frame and take a quantum leap in what we're doing.
Yeah, so the chaos almost becomes the fuel for...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this balance, D. Hawk and others, the founder of the Visa credit card and all that, wrote this book on the chaotic organization and the idea of a chaord, right?
Yeah.
And so that's balancing exactly the need for having some degree of recognizable pattern, some degree of order, because if it's all all the time VUCA, right? All the time that kind of frame, you can't really make sense of anything. So you have to all the time dance, as you were talking about, have that dance, have that conversation between order and chaos. It just reminds me of the Chinese characters for crisis. It's both opportunity, for chaos. It's opportunity and crisis. So you have that ability you can see where there may be the opportunity to make something that is concrete out of this and move forward, and also that things could fall apart. How do you balance that? And I think that's where having objectives, and I have a framework, we might talk about that later, of looking at the different levels of thrivability, of the different aspects of a system. But again, looking for that as a kind of meta objective, then if you have, I think, a healthy and authentic community, one that isn't just task-oriented, that isn't just a great team, but is starting to actually be a community that can learn together and that can move through uncertainty together because of the bonds, the systemic connections that they have, you're able to move through new landscapes in an anti-fragile way and deal with VUCA situations. And that's a huge advantage in today's world.
Yeah. So let me just rephrase that just to see if I grab it all. So what you say, and I keep thinking of those teams in Australia where the Navy SEALs compared to the women non-athletic teams, and I'm trying to translate that into teams in an organization, for example, or departments in an organization, or entire organizations. And if I hear you correctly, you say, if you build a living human system, your organization, in such a way where the relationships are cultivated, where there is space, where there is trust, where there is flexibility in the connections, then you open up the possibility to go through different stages of thrivability, and that are going to support you in moving in this VUCA world where we find ourselves more and more often these days. Yeah. And that you can even go further beyond the agile stage and actually thrive when there's chaos. Did I get that right? Is that what you meant?
That's exactly right. And exactly right. With a caveat that I don't think it's necessarily a good strategy to seek to create chaos and to find and to make that your thrive point. No. Right? It's the ability to deal with chaos. That's what's key. And to anyway create thrivable outcomes. But it's not that's the sweet spot. That's an extreme, and we're finding more and more of these kind of VUCA environments. Yeah. And the organizations that can thrive through those are the ones that really are robust. Yeah. But absolutely right. It's having those conditions that create a healthy, it's like having a healthy immune system, like having a healthy being that you can take on shock, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what it comes to in organizations that are not fragile, because they know how to work only within certain parameters where if there's any challenge to their system, they're gonna, that's the
system
ones
goes
that are
tilt.
fragile. Right, exactly.
Yes. This is so exciting because I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I am trying to find language and ways for leaders then to translate this into if this is the path that I want to be on with my organization, what does that then mean for my leadership? If I want to lead systemically, if I want to innovate systemically, if I want to create this strong immune system within these corporate walls, or maybe have more permeable walls than before. then how do I go about that? So what is it that leaders of any kind, in your opinion, can do in order to embrace that more?
Well, I really think it has to do with something we had talked about a while ago in another conversation about listening. About listening. And also providing space for things to emerge.
Yeah.
And if you're all the time saying, hey, we got to control this and I got to predict what's happening next, and you're filling up every moment with your projection, your strategic plan, however you want to look at it, you're not allowing for the system, you're not listening to how the system, how your organization, or how the environment, what cues is it giving you for more optimal thriving, right? Because you're saying, oh, I know what to do here. You're listening to what is the system doing that you might be able to dance better with rather than dictating the dance. So it's this question of control and of certainty. I think leaders who are able to listen into, when I was studying with Russell Acuff, we did a lot of scenario planning, both normative scenario planning, where we looked at the idealized design, idealized future, and extrapolatory scenario planning, where we looked at probable, probable future. Yeah. And we compared these two, and we did a gap analysis and all that. Great. And then when I was working with Bertalanffy and with John Warfield and with others who were more working on a systems design framework, they looked at social systems design. So design is not about planning, which takes from here and projects to the future. Yeah. And we say, okay, so let's make a 5-year plan. Boom, then we implement it. Boom, 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 boom. The moment you start implementing it, it's already out of date because you're sticking to the plan, right? Okay, so but planning is still important, right? But that's one of the drawbacks because it projects. Design kind of starts on the other side of the river and builds the bridge backwards. So imagine the year 2030 and what could our organization look like then? And let's completely just drop into a fantasy world and say, what could it be like? We have to stay within the laws of physics and all of that, okay? But what could our corporation be in a real, what's its true potential? You dream. It's like what George Bernard Shaw says, you see things as they are and ask why, but I dream of things that never were and ask why not. That's the design framework. So dreaming of things that never were. And you build the back to the present. So that's a different kind of co-constructing of listening into potential. But there's a third one that's coming online now that I think takes this even further. And I think leaders who work in VUCA environments can really benefit from this third frame in addition to the other two. It doesn't replace the other two, right? Planning, designing, and curating. The last one is curating. So curating emergence. What does that mean? Like a curator of art, in a museum. Yeah. They don't make the art, but they set the lighting. They put where the people, when they flow, they're going to see the different art in a different sequence, etc. And they create an experience for you by creating the environment for that. How do we curate emergence? Yes. Curate the conditions for thrivability. What does that mean? How can a leader curate the conditions for thrivability? And by the way, it's not just the social aspects, right? We've talked a lot about that, but there's the technological aspects as well. Yes. And finding technologies that connect people with life, that don't disconnect. So technologies that connect and that allow us to be more attuned with what's happening in our environment, more attuned with the processes of change. Okay. There's these words now that are coming online in sociology, like the zombification, right? You see the kids who are just, they walk and they don't even see what they're walking into, right? With their eyes glued, right? Yes. They have this term now that to describe when kids get together and they're with their devices, and there's a whole etiquette now where you're not supposed to talk because you're together, but you're on your device. You can send messages even if you sit next to the person. And there's actually a term in sociology now coming along that is not socializing, it's called notionalizing. So you notionalize when you get together and you don't talk, but you're on your device. So there are a whole new set of terms with the technologies that are that we are working with. There's a whole new areas of income of chronic psychological issues. We have from ADD, attention deficit disorder. There's now nature deficit disorder, and NDD, nature deficit disorder, comes from the work of this book called The Last Child in the Woods, written I think in the late 80s. But now it's a clinical condition that has specific behavioral traits associated with it, and it's people who are not exposed enough to nature and to living things in their environment, and there's all kind of nervous dysfunctional aspects of their being and of their relating from NDD. So again, what technologies do we bring that create more robust, less fragile, more thriving systems? Yes. So this is part of that systemic innovation, that part of that socio-technical systems whole engagement that we're looking at, not just optimizing for the human, but also finding the technologies that allow us the full expression of our being.
Exactly. I just love the curating, the curating that you mentioned. It is, it's what I call the facilitating of the emergence. It's about what in other contexts is called holding or creating a space where you can let this emerging happen, or support this emerging from happening. And you don't know what will emerge, but that's not the point. The point is that you have a role where you are able to do that, and for the betterment of the entire system to which you have a serving role. And I love that about the technology also. So what technologies are we bringing into our environment? And are they supportive of our living human systems? Or are they not supportive of our living human systems? And what's the impact of that? And also, what do we then choose? It's also a choice. And maybe for leaders and organizations, it's the choices could be more optimum, especially when we tie it back to the thrivability. Because there's a very clear connection between thrivability and people feeling in flow, people feeling like they can work under optimum conditions compared to when they are not. And whether we like it or not, it also shows in the numbers in the end. So there's so many different things I want to ask you next. One has to do with the stages of thrivability, and the other has to do with being the systems we want to see in the world. And maybe that's even connected. So I'm leaving it up to you. Where would you like to take this next?
Well, maybe you can tie it into the question of, the leadership capacities and roles. And my own holding is that there's so many different frames around leadership. There's situational leadership. There's innate leadership. There's all different kind of ways in which you can frame the concept of leadership. But for me, it's something that we can learn. It's something that anyone can do. It's a way of being in life. Parker Palmer has this beautiful book, Let Your Life Speak. And in this book, he talks about community. He talks about connection and context. Yeah. And he says, to be a leader, interestingly enough, we often define leaders in terms of, hey, you have to have followers. If you don't have any followers, you're not a leader. Well, that's not the case. According to Parker Palmer, it's how you lead your life. Yes. Can you lead? If you are on Mount Everest hiking alone, which you shouldn't do, by the way, but you're in some place. Yeah. And what decisions do you make? Are you leading your life in a leaderly way, living your life in a leaderly way? What does that mean? And I think this involves not only a skill set, certain know-how, certain abilities that you often can learn in school and you can learn in training programs. And it also involves a mindset. So this kind of thing that we've been talking about, very difficult to be a leader who's okay with uncertainty, okay with not being in control, okay with allowing things to emerge, listening into that. That takes actually a lot of leadership strength. Yes. It's not always having the answer, the ready answer, and I know what to do. Listening, what is the system telling you? That curating, and that takes a lot of strength. I think, by the way, that's why those non-professional athlete teams of women do better, because they really are listening to each other, and they're not just pushing themselves to their utter limit all the time. They're making sure they go through everything and each checkpoint together, right? So they have less crises, breakdowns. It's less volatile.
Yeah.
They're just on. So that involves this third aspect, from skill set to mindset, right? The skill set to know how, the mindset to know why, right? So knowing why things are emerging and allowing for things to emerge, et cetera, to a heart set. And that's something we don't really put a lot of emphasis on, the heart set, the care how and the care why competencies, right? Learning from nature, the ability to cultivate empathy in yourself and in the systems you're working with, right? That make for greater connection, that make less zombification, those kind of things where the heart set, the care why competencies and the care how competencies. Yeah. So I think for me that's a way in. It allows to move to this notion of being it comes from Gandhi's famous admonition: be the systems you wish to see. So be the change you wish to see in the world, right? That's what he said. Yeah. Be the change you wish to see in the world. And the idea of being the systems you wish to see in the world really is for systems thinkers, designers, and practitioners.
But also for leaders.
Often for leaders, because oftentimes they lead, or you design, or you work with the systems out there. You lead with that group. They're over there, right? And I'm over here, and I'm leading you, but I'm not a part of this thing. I'm ahead of it, or somehow I'm acting on it, or I'm telling you what to do. That's not being the system. If you are, that's sort of mapping, modeling, simulating the system, and then charting it out and telling what to do. It's command and control still.
Yeah, it's still in the old framework. I call it treating the organization like a machine.
Exactly. Now, you could kind of possibly think of yourself as being part of the machine, and maybe there are, in certain contexts, in certain military contexts, it's important to work like a machine like that. Absolutely. And you shouldn't take on individual initiative, because if you do, that machine breaks down when you have to have a very tightly fit, you have to deal with a crisis right there. You better not try to figure out what to do in consensus. No, you follow that one person who says, do this here now. Because it requires rapid engagement and everyone working collectively together without questioning. That's very important. But if you want to be an evolutionary organization and you want to be able to engage in new situations that you don't have a roadmap to, right?
Yes.
Then this idea of collective intelligence, of really how can we get the different perspectives? How can we bring in the different knowing without have to be centralized in one person's knowing? That's also part of the system thinking.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, just to get to the last point on this, which is where you were asking me as well to go on these different ways of being the system you wish to see in the world. I have this four levels of thrivability. Let's say 4 levels of thrivability, right? And so if we can curate, the thrivability at each of these levels, but in a way that we're curating all of them at the same time. Not like, okay, one, now we're done with that, now let's go to the next. No, that's not what it's about. We have to curate all of them at the same time.
Yeah.
And the first level is taking care of yourself. It's hard to be able to take care of others, to be a leader, to do anything if you are not able to function well.
Right.
So it's what I call intrapersonal thrivability.
Right. So you're taking care of your own system.
Exactly. And that level is simply thrivability with oneself, right?
Yeah. And simply, before you go to the second level, we say simply, but for many people, it's not that simple. I see so many leaders who put in so many hours and who hardly see their families and who hardly get any sleep and are close to burnout because they're working so hard. And it's so difficult for them to put their oxygen mask on first. They are just in a zillion places at once, trying to thrive or make the environment thrive or others, but they are not really taking care of themselves. So I just wanted to pause you there and really
it's important.
Have others understand that how important that is to take care of your own personal system and make sure that it's healthy.
There are times when people don't do that, and then they become known as martyrs if they really are even successful in doing that. And become, they can be thought of as, how much they're heroes, they're martyrs, they sacrifice themselves. But we don't need to sacrifice. If you sacrifice yourself, it means that there's an end point to what you can do.
Yes.
And if you are looking to find ways of ongoing engagement, you need to put your oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
If you're going around making sure everybody else has their oxygen mask before you put yours on, it's going to come a point where you can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be out of oxygen yourself. And maybe you'll have helped a bunch of people, but you will have stopped yourself from continuing to help people in the long term. So helping the organization, it's just a metaphor, but helping the organization or continuing with the thrivability of the organization does mean, as you say, really focusing on taking care of yourself as well. Yeah. So that's what, but not to the exclusion of the other three, right? So these all four need to be balanced. All four have to be balanced. There's none to the exclusion of the others. So there's the intrapersonal. The second level is the interpersonal, right?
Yeah.
And so much of our focus in organizational dynamics and are focused on this level of non-dysfunctional relationships, where we don't have sabotage, where we don't have intrigue, how can we build trust among each other? And very important. And that's just the second level and the second domain. It isn't the only thing we need to look at. It's thrivability with one's community and one's social system.
Yeah.
Very, very, very important at that level, the interpersonal human domain. Mm-hmm. At the third level, we come to, and these are kind of like expanding sense of self. That's why I go with these levels. Way. At the third level, we're at the trans-species sustainability. So this is how are we thriving with our more than human world? Okay, so are we destroying the platform on which we're building our systems? That's not good. So how do we create robust environments in which to thrive? Which means we have to create thriving environments.
Yeah.
So that starts looking at the ecosystem and our relationship with the ecosystem and the more than human world.
Okay.
And then we get to the fourth level. And by the way, these three levels are based on the work of Carolyn Merchant, from a professor at Berkeley, University of Berkeley, in California. University of California, Berkeley. That's right. That's what it's called. And she is a political philosopher, and she talks about the egocentric frame of value memes or of ethics, and that's the intrapersonal, taking care of number one. Then there's the homocentric. I don't know why she doesn't call it anthropocentric, but she calls it homocentric, which is looking at our relationship with all human beings and caring for the brotherhood and sisterhood of our species. And then she talks about the ecocentric, which is we're part of a living planet and having that kind of ethical framework. Mm-hmm. The fourth level, which I add to this, is transgenerational sustainability, or it's the kind of thrivability with past and future generations. So it's this way of saying, how, you talked about conversation before. How are we in conversation with our ancestors? I mean, are they looking at what we're doing and saying, WTF? Or are they saying, great, this is, wow, you're doing us proud. You're carrying on our legacy, taking it in new ways, whatever. And same with future generations. Can we think 7 generations, ahead? And can we say, would they be proud of us as well? Or would they say, what are you doing? You're creating a narrative that's going to be very difficult for us to continue, to carry on the narrative you're setting up for us. There's going to be a difficult world, etc. So that is the fourth level. If we can combine the intrapersonal thrivability, the interpersonal thrivability at the human level, the trans-species thrivability, and the transgenerational thrivability. And when it comes to transgenerational, it shouldn't be just of human beings, because you've already included the trans species. So it should be transgeneration of all beings on the planet, right? So, are the trees still around 7 generations down, right? And are they also part of our narrative?
Yeah.
So this for me is this integral systemic thrivability framework across these 4 domains.
Right. I love these. These are fascinating because they have so many layers and so many. What it does for me also when I'm listening to you and listening to all these different levels, context, stages, realms of thrivability, it reminds me of and how you say they are need to be in balance. It reminds me of the moving in and out of the different layers of systems and systems in systems. And what it tells me when I'm in conversation, for example, with leaders trying to look at the complexity that they find themselves in, we meet the exact same layers of the complexity in their environment, where there's the self, where there's the interpersonal, where is the larger ecosystem, and the cross-generational, especially in family businesses, by the way. But that's also part of the awareness. Sometimes we're so in our own world and there's so much complexity going on that it's difficult to actually stand still and see all these systems and think, wait a minute, I am trying to solve problems and thrive. But at what level am I trying to solve problems now? Where am I?
Right.
Am I running around trying to save everyone with the oxygen masks in? And do I forget my own? Or what level or what system am I operating in at this point? And it's all moving all together and it's all at the same time.
Right.
So why do I feel like I'm not getting ahead? And that has to do with we keep switching systems. We keep switching the level at which we are trying to thrive and then feel that we're not getting anywhere. So there is... So I find that fascinating, the stages, how you describe them, and that gives a sort of a language to be more aware of that we have multiple screens, multiple systems that we walk in and through and function in all the time, 24/7.
Yeah.
And that thrivability is something that we can look at that can infuse all those levels, but it does require a different way of looking at it.
Absolutely. This idea of the lenses of looking at it, as you're saying, this is exactly where it goes beyond systems thinking.
That's so interesting. The moment you say you take off your glasses.
Yeah.
So speaking of lenses.
Exactly. So what are we seeing, right? And what is limiting our view, and what is each lens we put on allows us to see. Certainly, we put on the medical systems lens. I mean, Bertalanffy had this wonderful different. He talked about 3 specific lenses and systems. He talked about the system environment lens, where we look at what is the system and what is the relationship to the environment, both the internal environment. So you can take a human being, and we're made out of 11 systems. So there's the respiratory system, there's the skeletal system, there's the nervous system, the reproductive system, the lymphatic. I don't know. I won't name all of them, but they're all these. And then within those, there's subsystems as well, like the liver is an organ, and that's its own system. And within those, you have cells, and cells are their own system. So you can go down, and you can also go up and say, okay, we're a human being, we're part of a family. That's another system. We're part of an organization, we're part of a civilization, whatever. So you go up and put ourselves in context. He had then another lens, which was the structure function lens, and it's like when you go to a museum and I guess natural history, and you see the transparent human being, and you press a button and you can see all of the different systems within within that. It's like taking a slice of the system. So when you have an organizational chart, you can say, okay, this is the structure function of the system. This is how it works. These are different roles, right? So it's not just looking at it in context. The system environment is like when you go to the mall and you see a map when you at the entrance. It says you are here, and you see all the rest, right?
Yeah.
Or you see, our solar system is here in the galaxy, right? That's a system environment model.
Yes.
And when you look at, what are the organizational chart, who does what, and how are we related, that's a structure function model. When you look at the system over time, what are the inputs, the changes, and the outputs, that's a system process function, a system process model. And you combine these different lenses, you see different things. But if you look through only one, you get only a partial perspective. So how do we not only use these systems perspectives to think systems thinking, but how can we see the systems? Really, how can we feel the systems? Now, there's the empathetic component, right? How can we bring empathy into the systems that we're a part of, even the more than human world, right? How we're part of this. Like somebody said, I'm not a human being trying to save the rainforest. I'm part of the rainforest trying to save itself. Wow, it's a beautiful systemic reframe, right? And there's this empathetic expansion of self.
Yeah.
And to move from systems thinking to systems seeing to systems feeling to systems being, where we're in flow and we are part of this emerging conversation, this dance of systems, and we are part of that. And to see what is our dance, not trying to control it, not trying to manipulate it, but trying to find its joy, try to find its true expression on this planet in the long frame of what it means to be a human being on this planet now. So for me, this is very much about systems being, systems seeing, feeling, and not just systems thinking, because it stays here. And we can't do all that nurturing. We can't do all that creating the context. We can't do all that curating.
Yeah.
Right?
You miss a couple of lenses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that for me is where it really comes to the empathetic frame. To be a good leader of systemic change, it's not figuring out all of how to create a good technological system. It's not just about knowing how to fix the problems or how to solve the problems. And we do a lot of problem solving. We do a lot of pathology, in our business world as well, where everything is a problem or everything is something that needs to be fixed. But people aren't problems to be solved or to be fixed. And life isn't a problem to be solved or to be fixed. So how do we create that flow that really optimizes our true potential, and I think that's jointly with others, so we can have thriving communities. We use the collective intelligence to find our way forward as communities and as cultures and as a civilization and as a species.
So what I take from this piece is, and this is my translation, my words, but what I take from this is that what we just discussed is like an invitation to at least leaders, but maybe all human beings, but at least leaders who say, I want to tap into this thrivability in the different stages. I want to be the system I want to see in the world. I want to fulfill a role in creating a healthy organizational system. And the invitation is to, one, be really aware of what the lenses are that you look through when you look at the world, when you look at your systems, when you look at your organization, when you look at your family, when you look at yourself fulfilling a leadership role. Because how you use the lenses to look at the world very much determines how you show up in it, and where you start contributing to the thrivability, where you choose to be more in the planning phase, or if you design more, or if you want to move into the curation, it determines, these lenses determine whether you pay attention to all 4 stages of thrivability or if you do it only in 1 or 2 areas or realms.
Nice.
So that's what I take from this. And I can imagine for everyone who's watching, this is a lot to take in. Mm-hmm. So as a last question to you, I'd like to ask you, Alexander, what is a place to start? Or maybe what is a place, maybe from your own experience, where you started, that you'd like to share with everyone who's watching? The people who say, yes, I want to be the system I want to see in the world, and go to this thrivability and innovate systemically. But it sounds like a whole mouthful. Where do I start?
Well, this comes to me to something that Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein said. They had this manifesto from Pugwash, Nova Scotia, and they said, "Remember your humanity, and forget the rest." These are these scientists, and they're thinking in terms of all these levels of complexity, right? And we've talked about so many things that you said, but just the start point is remember your humanity. And I think a good kind of, for me, a good touch point to remember is that those teams in the Eco Challenge, right? These teams of non-professional athletes, women who care for each other and who create dynamic environments that can meet their own environment. They create their own environment among themselves, right? That they can meet the challenge, even the most difficult challenges. They meet them together. Mm-hmm. And for a leader to know that they don't have to have all of the answers, that if they hold the others, they will be held as well. Mm-hmm. That being the system. So then they are being held. All of a sudden, they are now more than just themselves alone. Mm-hmm. They're in a community that co-creates and that doesn't just solve problems. And for me, that's the important thing not to forget. That we are co-authors and that we co-emerge, co-curate, right? And that together we'll find, and that doesn't mean we always know the right answers, but we don't know them by ourselves either. We make mistakes as a group, somebody else may, but that's, doesn't blame them anymore. We blame ourselves. And frankly, if their mistakes are distributed, there's much more resilience in the system than if it's all dependent on one person. They make mistake, it ripples across the rest of the system. Yeah. And that kind of leaderly flame. So yeah, remember humanity and forget the rest. I mean, in other words, don't really forget the rest, but that's the thing that gotta come first, connect. Those 3 things that I think can help with being the systems you wish to see in the world is to focus on connection beyond just contact. So it's not just, okay, we're in touch, but I see you, that connection, which is really I see you and I'm listening to you, not just trying to interpret what you're saying in my own way. I'm really connected. So that's connection. Mm-hmm. Then coherence beyond congruence. So we're really kind of in a way that builds up on each other, that creates, in systems terms, synergy. Mm-hmm. Right? We can do things together. That comes out of coherence. Coherence, not just congruence. And the last one is consonance. And I think consonance beyond resonance. Resonance is great. We can go to a rock concert or whatever it is and say, hey, I like this. But consonance is when we're co-creating something and we're in such a jive. We're really feeding off of each other, right? So connection, coherence, and consonance in those living systems that we're part of on all 4 levels, then we can really create thrivable dynamics. And I think that's where we start.
Yeah, yeah. That's where we start. And for today, that's where we wrap up as well.
Okay.
Alexander and everyone who's watching, we've been talking about so many different things about thrivability in different stages of the planning, designing, and curating. We've been talking about different systemic lenses and how, as a leader, it's important to be aware of which lenses you then see through and how you shape a role and how you show up and how you can actually be the system you want to see in the world by starting with your own humanity and from there connecting with others and co-creating so that you can create spaces where new changes and new possibilities can emerge. And you may not know what they're about, but that's okay because you have the rest of the system around you to go and explore and find out together. So there's many more things that we discussed, but I couldn't possibly summarize them all without doing everything again.
Oh, but that was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank you, Alexander, for this really profound conversation. And I'm sure that everyone who's been watching enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being here in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you.
And for everyone who is watching, I'm sure that you enjoyed this session. And if you'd like to take the conversation further, go to our online community space and have a moment of co-creation with other participants. And I'm sure I'll tune in as well. Thank you so much for watching. See you next session. Take care. Bye-bye.